a special interview today. We are joined by the legend of the 1980s, the one and only, the Russian Nightmare, Nikita Koloff, who has a brand new show on Lifetime Network. Nikita, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, I appreciate it, guys. Thank you for having me on. I'm very honored to be here.
Yeah, well, it's our pleasure, too, because it's not often we get to talk to an NWA legend such as yourself, and you've got an exciting new show on Lifetime where it's about your family and about the life of a preacher's daughter. In fact, that's the title. So why don't you tell our listening audience a little bit about the show, and then we'll talk some more about your career.
Well, I tell you, I'm very excited about it. I've kind of, you might say, come full circle, having had of course, the career in wrestling, which you mentioned, we'll talk about in a minute. But coming full circle, having left wrestling back in officially in the early 1993, on this quest of sorts, and in 1993 of reflecting on what I had accomplished in wrestling and looking forward to what the future held, and realized that I had acquired this level of fame and if you will from wrestling, and yet even though I was successful, I drew the conclusion I was really unfulfilled. It was kind of an empty chase, and it was at in October of 1993, 17 October, that I found myself at an altar surrendering my life to Christ, and that set me on a path, a journey that has been nothing short of amazing these last 19 plus years. Having traveled into 25 different countries and written, several books and making movies, and now through an opportunity through Lifetime Television, being a part of a new reality show called The Preacher's Daughters, and centered on, as you mentioned, the life of my youngest daughter, Colby, as well as the whole family. I have actually 4 beautiful daughters, Colby being the youngest of 4, but it's centered around her, and really just what that life looks like to be the daughter of a pastor, of a preacher like myself, as well as the Coleman family and the Perry family, and what people are going to get an opportunity to see, really an inside look into what does that life look like. A lot of misconceptions in regards to that, and hopefully we'll be able to dispel a few misconceptions, and at the same time, help bring a real sense of reality that, hey, we're just real people, like the viewing audience or like the listeners today. We're just real people with the same challenges, the same issues, whether it be divorce or dating or teen pregnancy or a host of other topics that people are going to see over the course of the season as it unfolds.
That's great, and I'm glad you mentioned the misconceptions, because that's one of the things that I know both the show will reveal, but our listeners will want revealed as well, is that, you always hear the story of the preacher's daughter rebelling against her father and going out there and partying and being wild. But as you said yourself, it shows a real family with normal issues and not the perception that's not necessarily the reality, which is something as a wrestler you know quite a lot about.
I do know a lot about that, and that's not to say, just for the viewer or the listener, not to say that they're not going to necessarily not see rebellion, and not that does not happen. I mean, look, that's a part of life too. But preachers' kids are not the only ones who rebel their parents' authority. They just happen to be under more of a microscope, or you might say live in a glass house. So it's just magnified, and really, honestly, there's some added or unnecessary pressure put on these preachers' kids because, your dad's a pastor, you shouldn't be doing that. Well, really, I'm just as normal as you. Why not? And the difference, hopefully, our hope is with the show, the difference will be that they'll get to see, the viewing audience will get to see just how faith-based families address those situations or handle those situations, and it'll make a difference in people's lives. I know already last night, someone pulled me aside last night and said, "I just want to say thank you." And I said, "Okay." And they said, "We watched the show last Tuesday night, and I have a daughter, and I was really inspired. The fact that you have these daddy-daughter dates, I was really inspired by that, and for the first time, I took my daughter out on a date last week, and man, we had an awesome time. We had a great time of communication and talking to one another. And you know, guys, if that's any indication that what this show can do, even amidst the drama that people are going to see, then it'll be rewarding for me and have made a difference.
I certainly hope it does make a difference in people's lives, and I think you're on the right path to that. I mean, you've been on that path for 20 years now, ever since you became a born-again Christian and got into the ministry. But one quick question before I go back to that. I just wonder if you feel there's a little bit of a parallel here with Colby now discovering, you know, she's already had the scrutiny of being a preacher's daughter, but now she's also got the scrutiny of being on camera and having her shadowed in her daily life. And you of course, were shadowed by a camera for much of your wrestling life. Do you feel, you said it comes full circle, but do you feel that she understands maybe now more what your life was like back then?
Yeah, it has been an absolute amazing experience for her, and I've known for a long time that she was honestly just that there was such a wonderful destiny for her, and you know, not necessarily in television, but after watching how she's handled herself in interviews and on camera. You know, we were out in L.A. and we filmed the Jeff Probst show recently, and see how she handled herself with a live viewing audience, and of course cameras following her around town and around her home and out to lunch and other things that we've done. It's been just an incredible blessing to me, and really in one aspect not a surprise to me, just because of just who I know she is, and I believe the America will I believe, not just because she's my daughter, but I believe they'll end up falling in love with Colby when it's all said and done.
Well, I think that probably also comes full circle because we saw America fall in love with you in the 1980s when you went from possibly one of the most hated villains in professional wrestling to one of the most beloved good guys when you teamed up with Dusty Rhodes. So I do want to ask you a little bit about that because the rumor has it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that it was actually Dusty who gave you the nickname the Russian Nightmare. Now, is that true?
You know, I think there was a play, and it may have been. I don't know that I can honestly, because, you know, Ivan was the Russian Bear, and so we certainly had contemplated, you know, some different nicknames, and I think with the fact that he was the American Dream, the natural flip side to that being the most hated guy in wrestling, the ultimate villain, you might say, was to become the Russian Nightmare and an adversarial role against the American Dream. So I don't have any problem with giving Dusty the credit. I don't remember for sure, but hey, he was ingenious with many of the things he came up with, so that certainly could have been one of them.
I know he's definitely a genius when it comes to putting words together and cutting promos and saying memorable things. So whoever gets the credit, I'm sure if it was said, he made it memorable for everybody that watched. And that's one of the things I also want to get into is that your career in the 80s was so memorable, and yet during that entire time, you never ended up in the World Wrestling Federation, or as it's now known, the WWE. How many times did they come knocking on your door saying, please come and be a part of our company?
You know, very interesting. They weren't real aggressive in pursuing me. You know, one of the few times that I might have been approached, Barry Darsow, who wrestled as Crusher Khrushchev with us, and made a decision he was leaving to go there. He had approached me, wanted me to be the other half of Demolition with him, and I just politely declined, and of course he went on to get Bill Eadie. But I chose not to go to Vince McMahon, to New York, to the WWF, WWE now, really because of my loyalty to Jim Crockett Promotions, who gave me a break that I never would have ever imagined or dreamed. Certainly, it wasn't on my radar as a child. To become this, a Russian success or wrestling success, let alone the Russian Nightmare. And so I just felt a real sense of loyalty to Jim Crockett Promotions, and that is why, although I know I could have went up there, probably made 10, 20 times the amount of money I could have made, or I did make, staying with the NWA, WCW, Crockett Promotions. I chose out of loyalty to stay with Jim Crockett.
Well, I think your loyalty and integrity is definitely unquestioned here. And in fact, that leads to my next question, because you're such a personable and charming guy that it's almost hard to believe that you were this villainous character in the 1980s. How hard was it for you to maintain that and actually like scare the fans to be afraid of you when you're such a nice guy?
Well, now listen, I would be remiss if I didn't say, for the record, I often joke, I say, I was stone cold long before Steve Austin. and of course, what I mean by that is, honestly, on a very serious, honest level, prior to my salvation, prior to surrendering my heart and my life to Christ, I wasn't too far off from that villainous character that you saw, in terms of maybe how I cared for people, or how I not that I treated people in a horrible way, but I just wasn't, I would say, a very loving person, and more just about my business, and honestly, it was more about me. Well, no, real honestly, it was all about me. It was my world. You were just living in it. And what really changed all that was the surrender of my heart in October 1993 into who I am now. And I'm still growing and learning, of course, in this relationship with Christ. But definitely have to give credit where credit's due, and it's all due to the relationship I have with Him. Because if you had met me back then, you might have had a kind word for me, but depending on which side of the fence I was on, whether I was a heel or a baby face, or good guy or bad guy, you might have had very varied opinions of me. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, that makes sense.